All right. Cool. Let me delete this. Cool. 6 people today. First things first. We know that today is the new month, July 1st, and quote unquote potentially the first day of recession on paper. I haven't fact checked that just yet, but I'll probably hear something about it on YouTube or something later today. And if I see anything interesting, I'll send it to you guys. But first things first, right? Our monthly is bullish. We can't really assume anything other than bullish, especially right now, given how we have already attempted, right, to give us any type of decent retracement twice. One was actually a potential structural disruption, which is what we're playing in right now. But two is the fact that our daily structure, our swing structure, has not really been invalidated whatsoever. So given that information, right, we have been given relatively choppy price action. We were never, like I said, we never invalidated our bearish bias, right? Internally, we gave a new structural range, and the bias hadn't really changed after Tuesday. I know we'll get to EURUSD and AUDUSD. AU actually gave us the desired direction that we wanted. EU gave us a direction, just did not give us the pullback, but I'll get back into that. However, with DXY at the moment, right, we've already seen once again right, a failed reaction, right? However, there really is no POI that we're going off of. So all I'm looking at is the reaction and the bounce. The bounce, therefore, being, right, via previous structure now propelling us, right, to invalidate the bearish reaction, is now giving me the inclination that we will probably continue higher, because just as this occurred here is really what had happened here. Basically the same scenario where we had the failed move leading into the internal continuation. However, this is looking strong from a momentum perspective, and in order to combat that or play with that, right, whatever happens once we reach relative point of interest, right, is going to be extremely interesting, right? We would definitely need some sort of bullish transition. Why? Because we've already transitioned into a bearish bias, at least internally. Therefore, we would need a bullish scenario in order to give us that next level of, or that next high, which is what we're basically aiming for, right? Because like I said, with playing structure internally, we can't necessarily judge what happens after the high has been taken, only until that happens, right? Like I said, we cannot necessarily project we're going to get a liquidity grab. We cannot project that we're just going to keep continuing 100%. It's just the reaction after that high is taken is what's going to tell us whether or not we're going to continue higher or potentially give us an internal liquidity grab. But I don't want to necessarily get into that reversal bias only until that move has been confirmed, right? And with EURUSD, that's also why it was really hard to justify. It was really hard to justify, right, why this bullish move should continue us higher. Like we said last week, we met our overall point of interest that we pointed out 2 weeks ago. This had hit, I believe, on Monday, the 27th. Yes, on Monday, right? And from there, you could see now that the momentum is clearly into the downside. However, unfortunately, we did not get the deep retracement we anticipated. But this is where understanding internal structural ranges is actually coming into play, because I believe it was during Asia on Tuesday. Was it Asia on Tuesday? Yes, Asia on Tuesday. We actually created the new internal structural range. Right, solidified high, solidified low. Therefore, internally, my invalidation, I can change the color on this. Therefore, the invalidation to my bias would have been there, right? However, we needed a bearish transition internally. Right, and as we can see, low, high, right? And internally, when we go from there, sorry, where am I? Here. Low into high into transition, right? Therefore, any type of discount, premium within our invalidation, which is technically the same as the previous, right? That is our bearish scenario, and this is happening within session, right? So even though there isn't necessarily anything to give us here per se, especially from M1, the scenario is still at play because we're playing based on internal structural range of the previous move, of the previous overall bias, right? Because we know that we have been bearish for pretty much a couple of months now, and we know where our swing target is, right? And even now we're still trying to show some signs of bounce, but I don't necessarily see why this would be the catalyst that gives us anything higher. I would more so like to see our overall target be met before we start to anticipate anything in terms of a reversal bias, right? So internally, this made sense. After this, I did not really want to play it because it was a bit conflicting, just because we know that we see a bullish liquidity grab and a bullish liquidity grab here as well from a previous POI. So that shows signs of bullishness. However, I cannot necessarily justify anything into the upside. Just as I said, the swing bias has remained the same. The swing bias has not been invalidated, right? And if you were to attempt to trade a liquidity grab, this would have been a lot less, not necessarily in my rules. I would have more likely liked to see a type of premium, but there was just an order flow continuation here, right? And it really just goes to show how deep you will go with your scalp structure, whether or not you're trying to attempt to trade the internal scalp liquidity grab, or if you're wanting to trade the minor intraday scale here. So ultimately up to you. But as I said, I cannot justify anything in the bullish sense, right? Only until we see some sort of major high be cleared. And even now, if we're seeing, right, a unsubstantial new low, either way, I cannot really justify anything higher than this, at least until we reach our swing target, right? Whereas with AU, this one actually hit our target after we had discussed our order flow on Tuesday, right? Our target has been met. Now, whether or not we get that continuation, I do not know, because we actually did give a substantial new low. However, we know that our weekly is still bearish, our monthly is still bearish. We know where we're wanting to see this go from a monthly perspective. So as of now, nothing much has changed, right? Our monthly closure has just been super bearish, right? Even today we've been super bearish, so I don't necessarily have anything that goes against that. So yeah, as a whole, in summary, AU met our target that we've been talking about for about, let's see, since our transition here, which would have been the beginning of June. Since then, we haven't necessarily switched the bias. With EURUSD, it took its time, and we did have failed reactions in the meanwhile. But as we said before, we did not see substantial new highs. So, and once we reached our POI, then that was really the sign that gave us the liquidity to propel us now potentially almost to our swing target. But with that being said, do you guys have any questions, any studies you guys want to show today? Cool, only 7 of you guys, so if you guys want to talk about anything today, please go ahead. I'll give you guys like 2 minutes if you guys want to say anything. What's your opinion on people trying to buy EU yesterday? I mean, I already said why we cannot justify anything internally with EURUSD, because let's look at this. I don't know what they said, but I'm gonna just tell you why you cannot really justify it, and I'll actually go to a different chart. Or we could actually just keep it here, just annotate. I don't see that as high risk. Risk is relative. Risk is what you make it as. For example, however much you want to risk is 100% on you. However many trades you want to risk upon is 100% on you. I see it less from a risk perspective. I see it more from a probability factor. For example, we know right, we have our overall structural range. This is simple structure stuff. We know that is a continuation BOS, right? Meaning that internally we are bullish. All right, so we measure momentum, right? So realistically, if structure is still to continue, which is the only thing we can assume, then our only reasonable target is here. And that's been established. That's been established for weeks, right? So once we dive into this internally, we know our swing is bearish. Right, our major intraday is bullish, right? However, we did reference that POI on the side on the left over here. We've already referenced that, right? So we know that once that POI reacts from here and breaks here, we know that we are now bearish, which now aligns our major intraday with our swing structure. So internally, right, we already discussed this. All right, we already discussed what this was, right? And the previous solidified high is there, right? Or you could even argue here, but I'm just trying to keep it to the overall leg. So based on that, can I actually, Okay, that's not it. Okay, so we know high, low, high, into low, into high, into low. So where do you see any type of continuation BOS? The only time that I see it would be here. The only other time that I see it would have almost been there, but it did not. All right, the only continuation BOS I see is here. So what does this signify? It signifies this, right? Meaning that our entire range is still bearish, but you can also assume internal unwillingness. But internal unwillingness, right? In order for this continuation BOS to fully justify unwillingness from here, you have to take that out. If not, you're just guessing. And I think I'm pretty sure we've talked about this before. It's been a while, but the continuation BOS is only a sign of a pullback beginning. Now, once you see any type of bearish transition, right, you see the momentum start to shift, it becomes more so a sign of continuation. But like I said, this was choppy and I did not necessarily see anything unless you're trading M1 internally. There was really no true scenario here, only until you potentially trade the internal liquidity grab. And that's why I said the order flow continuation would have made sense if you traded any M1. But outside of that, let's dive into here now. Where here do we see a bullish scenario? A realistic bullish scenario? Because all I see here is order flow, break of structure, right? And then continuation BOS, right? However, we had a failed reaction here, making this one reasonable bullish scenario. That would have been bullish scenario number one. You break even once the high is taken. But once this high is taken, right, you could even argue order flow disruption, but once that is now invalidated, you have now a bearish liquidity grab. And that's where, as I said, this scenario would make sense. So there was one reasonable bullish scenario from my eyes. Obviously, you could also argue here, but there was no BOS, so how could you assume that low? Two, right, there was only one bullish scenario that I could see, and there's only one bearish scenario that made sense for me from the continuation perspective, even though I would have preferred the premium, right? The only reason why this would have made sense is because internally this is structure internally, and as you can see, there's a low here that takes that previous low there. That's why I would see that as continuation structure. But let me actually go back to this. Continuation structure after order flow is set. After order flow is set, you can easily have a scenario here with your invalidation be there. And that's the only scenario that makes sense for me from a bearish perspective. The only bullish scenario that would have made sense is the one we just stated here. And this would show signs of, or not necessarily signs, but it shows that you're dynamic and you're able to switch your bias accordingly, right? Because justifying a bullish scenario on a bearish trend is a lot harder than justifying a bearish scenario on a bearish trend. So see the continuation BOS not as a reversal. That's the entire point of why it's called continuation BOS, right? But you don't necessarily want to get yourself caught up with the reversal bias and with M1. And that's why you see me really restrain myself from, diving too much into this, especially for the new people. That's mainly why I do it. I don't necessarily like to get too much into this. This is more so quote unquote advanced. But I know you guys see it because everybody in here has been in here for a while. And that goes to show, I mean, that a something to learn from that would be, let me see, is what do you prioritize in terms of a confirmation when determining a bias, right? Because when you're determining a bias, there's really only going to be a couple of things. When determining a bias, you're going to measure structure, order flow, and that's basically it. These are the main two things that we're going to judge when determining a bias. Now, does order flow come before structure? Does structure come before order flow? Structure for me is always number one, but when now you're going into structure, there's now obviously things that fall into that too. Is what is your swing, major intraday, minor intraday, scalp. What is each, and what is each telling you, right? And now how can you harmonize each and every one? So for example, now in this scenario, right, the continuation BOS favors a bullish bias, but it goes against the swing, and it goes against the overall swing slash position as well. However, the major intraday and minor intraday are still technically bullish. So can you justify bullish scenario solely on major and minor while disregarding swing and position? Does it make sense to do so? If it does, how do you justify it? How do you enter? And that's where obviously models will come into play, right? Because your model is realistically your execution. So if a model fits in alignment with major and minor intraday, but it goes against swing and position, does it realistically make sense for that to give you a big move? And by realistically, I mean probabilistically. Is that probable to actually give you a good scenario, or will it more than likely fail and I'm too optimistic? Because I saw people trying to buy EU all week, if I'm being completely honest. Could you have gotten some trades out of it? Maybe. But it really just goes to back to you, whether how much you want to risk, what is your risk profile, how often do you want to trade, what kinds of trades are you looking for. So it's hard to, you know, say people were doing this and this, because we realistically don't know what they're looking for. So whenever you're trying to quote unquote reverse engineer it, what are you looking for? What do you prioritize? And how do you apply it? How do you put it all into conjunction? And that's okay. If it doesn't make sense to you, that's 100% okay. Because technically, right, this was bullish up until the failed conversion, which is what I showed you. Right, because technically the idea itself makes sense. The idea itself makes sense. Where you want to convert into bullish because of a bullish move, and you actually see strong order flow potentially come into play, right? However, this is the difference maker here. This is why we trade order flow disruption and structural disruption, because the entire overall principle behind the two concepts is a failed reaction. One is based on structure, one is based on order flow. But if you cannot understand the transitions, right, if you cannot understand the failed reactions, then you're doomed to continue to think of this. Oh, hold on. You're doomed to continue to think of this as a continuation to the upside, which in theory is good, right? It makes sense, right? And that really is the whole momentum theory. But in application, these minor details are what's going to make the big difference. Now, can you align the scalp with major intraday, or can you align the scalp with your swing, right? And which one will hold more probability? But it also varies by scenario. like I said, I could not justify anything to the upside because I'm looking for, you know, 100, 200 pip moves. So I just cannot justify anything into the upside because the probability of me getting a better move from the bearish sense is, you know, much more probable. You see, like just right here again. Once again, right here. You see a bullish move, you will more than likely see somebody try to buy something here because it makes sense from a theory standpoint. However, what you're trading is also influenced by where you're trading it, and we know that a swing target is back here. So the probability of seeing this go up, I'm not saying is 100% negated, but it is much more probable for me to see this as continuation BOS, solidification of range, and the continuation to the downside. That's more so how I'm seeing it. But yeah. Like, is either perspective wrong? Not necessarily. Like I said, it just depends on what you're looking for, what your risk profile is, when you're trading, how you're trading, and what type of model you're looking into. Well, I've kind of said this before already. I kind of already gave you guys my models. Well, think about it. I don't necessarily think that a model is based on structural level. So if you trade scalp models, why not trade them in a minor intraday sense to increase the probability and to get a bigger move? Because over time, RR is cool, right? But realistically, how much do you retain from RR? And if you can have a big intraday trade, right? And let's say 1% of your account is a 2.0 lot, and now you're looking at, instead of 20 pip TPs, right? You're looking at potential 100, 120 pip TPs. Yeah. Because I used to trade M1 all the time, if you remember. But the probabilities, right, were much better with minor intraday. And what really just gave me the whole like shift with that was this right here. My AU trade is what really just, because this was legitimately my first trade of the year. And let me find it. This one. This changed my entire perspective on it, because all I did was set a limit based on a minor intraday structural disruption to then just continue order flow. And I mean, you could even argue that there's different confirmations, like change of character right there. The inefficiency fill would have been filling that, right? But this really changed the whole paradigm for me, where this makes much more sense to me. Why? Because it took one attempt. It took one attempt. Whereas before, if I'm focusing solely on M1, M2, M3, it'll take multiple tries. And I mean, even Coase admitted to that, you know what I mean? Coase admitted to most of his, not necessarily most of his trades, but there was like some scenarios that took him multiple tries. I don't think it's about the trade itself though, I think it's about how the trade was generated. Yeah, exactly. And that's not to diss him. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not to diss him. It's just to say, look, I don't want to take losses. So what do I have to do in order to prevent losses as much as possible? because I already told you guys the entire perspective of high risk to reward isn't high risk to reward. The whole gist is to minimize drawdown and know that you're winning or losing at the same time. That was how that, I mean, know how, if you're winning or losing in the smallest amount of time possible. That was the entire point of high risk to reward. I didn't like drawdown, but now I realize I don't like losses. So how do I lose less while minimizing drawdown? We'll trade a model with a minor intraday perspective with swing targets, so it has to be in alignment. You see what I mean? So not necessarily this one trade changed it all for me, but I'm now putting the knowledge that I used for this with previous knowledge to make a new derivative while not necessarily changing the concepts that I'm trading, if that makes sense. All it is really just critical thinking. Because for example, with you, I'm pretty sure a lot of your trades are more minor intraday. Am I right or am I wrong? No, I'm talking to Lewis. Why? But why do you trade intraday? Why don't you trade scalp? So you just look for intraday targets, but I don't think you're trying. I don't think you're seeing what I'm trying to tell you. Why don't you trade your scalp timeframes for those intraday targets? Think of pretty much your entire journey up until today. What led you to intraday perspectives? Because my assumption would just to be that your minor intraday, your major intraday scenarios just hold a higher probability and they hold a higher frequency in comparison to swing. That's pretty much like the main reason why I would see why you transitioned into that. It would be much more probable than a scalp, but there's more frequency than a swing. Probability and frequency. Exactly, too many L's. So you understand that the concepts work, but you also understand that the probabilities are a lot dimmer the smaller you go. So you found your medium. Yes or no? You found your medium. So is that not indirectly what I just explained right now? Because that's basically what I said. That's like with the whole transitioning into minor intraday. Yep, and that's how you should be. That's 100% how you should be. Yeah, but at the same time, like, you can't compare yourself. There's too many factors. One, you don't know how they trade. Two, you don't know how often they trade. You don't know how many losses they took to show the trade they just shown you. You don't know the management behind it. You don't know the lot sizes. There's so much you don't know. So whenever I read stuff in the group, I just take it with a grain of salt. Like, there's not necessarily... Sorry, I got a text message. So you got to take everything with a grain of salt. And that goes for almost anything. Because your entire goal... is to find a model, create a model, I'm sorry, not find, create a model and make it work for you. Those are basically your two entire goals. And then that's when you can start implementing risk management. That's when you can start implementing scale out strategies, but you have to learn to win a trade first. Once you learn how to win a trade, you can now focus on scaling out. You're gonna focus on scaling in more positions. You can now get creative, but your foundation is gonna be how you find a bias, how you find an entry, and how you manage it. And also, like, you gotta also realize, like Kos and Tomas, English isn't their first language. See, very nice. Now, the only thing is I would trade this parameter. In the long run, that's going to help a lot. Yeah, and that's okay. Because like I said, you don't know how many losses they took for that. Because if you can just see how even a major intraday continuation BOS fails and continues in the original direction, you can only imagine how often that happens in a seconds time frame. I think this is actually something I wanted to do that might have, and it would have been a bit controversial, but I wanted to legitimately when I first made the group, I kind of didn't even want to have a group chat. I think a group chat is very, very conflicting. Because like I said, there's too many factors and you guys don't acknowledge those factors. And when you don't acknowledge those factors, then now you're psyching yourself out of, your progress. And I think it has a lot of pros and cons, but I think the pros will only come until you bring something to the table. If you don't bring anything to the table, you're trying to just leech off of people, and that's where you're gonna mess up. And that's why I had to implement the whole process the first 6 weeks of you just not looking at chats. So I can't prevent you from looking at chats, but I just prevent you from commenting. And that's what makes it hard, even for me to oh, sorry, never mind, I thought somebody was knocking. That's what makes it hard for even me to be active during trading hours. Why should I? Why should I be active in a bunch of different biases? I don't, that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Because then it conflicts with me. Yeah, and I would be yeah, and that gets super repetitive. And also, I have no obligation to talk to the group in the group chat. I have zero obligation to do that. If you guys want to talk to me, you guys know how to reach me. My DMs are always open. And I don't think I've ever gone longer than a week and a half from responding to a text. Like, I do journals every weekend. I try to get journals done within the first 4 days. And by the time I'm done with those, I'm already doing messages as well. So if you guys need to reach me, you guys know how to reach me, but I don't necessarily see a point in me being in the chat because, I don't want to be arrogant. I don't want to be necessarily trying to change people's biases, because then that goes against what I teach you guys. So I just discard it as a whole. Like, trading is such an independent thing, and you guys need to realize that. Very nice. Yeah, this is that transition we talked about, I believe at the beginning of the call. Yeah, very nice. So you see, show me your entry itself. Show me the entry itself. No, you're good, you're good. Show me the entry itself. Because the biggest commonality I've noticed with the people who I've seen like improve the fastest is it's been the fact that they took the time to just discard everything, discard every chat, discard everything, and solely focus on them. Excuse me. Yup, and even our Discord can be noise itself. And I mean that in no offensive way, but realistically, you have to figure this out on your own. That's why I said the pros of the group chat only come when you bring something to the table. For example, the best example I can think of is Dom Hall. He only started becoming active in the group only until he had been able to successfully trade. Because now you can have a reasonable conversation. But then now other things could stem, for example, arrogance, and I'm not gonna say any names, but I'm not saying that's an issue of itself, but that's now a byproduct of having 3 or 4 individuals that each successfully try to talk to each other. You can see an ego battle there, kind of, per se, but that's something completely different. But I think that's just a byproduct of it. However, I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing, because at the end of the day, you have to be 100% confident in how you trade and when you trade it, what you trade, everything. So I just see that as a byproduct. So from my running yesterday, yeah, and that's more of a, I think that's a non-trading thing. That's a non-trading thing, and I don't mean that to diss anybody, because I don't mind ego, but I do mind telling somebody that they're wrong, especially when it's how do I say this? When it's something that can't necessarily be a right or wrong thing. For example, you can't tell somebody their model is wrong. Because there is no my way or no way type of thing with models. Yeah, exactly. There's no such thing as my way or no way. Oh, hold on. Did you ever send that? Okay, here it was. Okay, cool. Cool. So the main thing that I'm noting with every really good trade is SL at invalidation. That's been probably the biggest thing that I've noticed. Right, and then a variant of liquidity grab, I see that. I don't necessarily like to explain LGs like that, just because it's kind of hard to explain where there, but realistically I would have argued here. Your Achilles heel for a minute. Yeah, invalidations. Yeah, I think the 2 biggest things that everybody should be using in their models 1, solidified points. 2, invalidations. Those are probably the two top things that I would say, that I think are absolutes for everybody. Because you guys, do you guys see the value in solidified points? And if you do, why? What is the value in them? What is the value in solidified points? No, not what they are. What is the value in them? That's a good question. Okay, so I agree with help to understand what targets to meet 100%. Your overall direction, I guess you could say that any type of structure will help you with overall direction, but yes, I'm looking for something more specific. Where to look for transitions? Yes, that's probably the big one. Where to look for transitions? They help you judge reactions. Because if you think about it, how solidified concepts came to be, or how models came to be. Like, for example, your foundation structure, right? Your foundation leads then into understanding solidified points. Why? Because it judges reactions. It judges, you know, technically, I want to say effort, but I don't want to confuse effort from a Wyckoff perspective then, but it helps you judge reactions and failed reactions. So once you learn to analyze, you know, failed reactions, that's how you get order flow disruption plus structural disruption. So these are models, foundation, and I guess, I don't know, we could call this a medium or something. But realistically, you want to get from foundation to model. And the reason why these work for me is because I created them. And I mean, you can, and I'm not saying that, I hate the word, I don't know, I won't say I hate the word creating, but I don't like to say it too much. Because in terms of conceptual things, a structural disruption could be seen from another person as a, I don't know, whatever other people want to call it. And on paper, it looks like the same, but they have different rules. And how do I know they have different rules? Is because I don't trade what they trade and they don't trade what I trade. We may get to the same result, but we have different minor characteristics. So I don't necessarily want to say create. That's why I more so want to say derivative. Because I have derived these concepts with this foundation and this knowledge. Yeah, man, like, I don't know, I don't like to use the word create just because I think it's super toxic. super toxic. That's also why I don't like to associate with other groups. It's just but yeah, any more questions? Or if not, I might have one or two more things to say before I end the call. Cool. Yeah, I hope it was a bit productive. I think I've also, like, I enjoy this stuff more than the actual reviews of the chart per se, Just because all I'm really doing is giving you my bias as of now, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stick through. So I like this more because it's more specific and you guys actually show me stuff and I can actually build upon what you're already knowing. So I think this stuff, these conversations are much more valuable than the actual studies itself. I mean, the actual review itself. I think this is where you're going to learn much more valuable stuff. Because I'm pretty sure I gave you guys stuff to go back test if you definitely, you know, desire to. Because it's more specific. But the two things I do want to say is I might, before school starts, I might do another round of videos. I'm probably going to do no more than 3. And I'll probably add them in the miscellaneous section, but I need to know exactly what you guys would want, what type of videos you would want. So let me actually write this down. So for the people that are watching this right now and for the people that saw the call until the end, I need 2 things. 1, if I were to make 3 videos, what type of videos would you want? It can be anything. It could be, oh, I'm not gonna say anything, but anything within constraint. Model creation, that's going to be a separate thing. That would be number 2. I'll get back into that. Yeah, you guys, actually, how do I do this? I need to figure out a way to get all of you guys' answers into one place. So I guess you guys could just DM it to me. It's cool. No, you guys can just DM it to me and I could write them down. But yes. And 2, I wanted to do this before, but I never got to it. But I'm gonna be giving out free one-on-ones to people who already have models in place, where we're gonna actually just hop on a call, just a one-on-one, free. I'm not gonna charge for this because I'm not necessarily teaching you anything. I'm just more so getting data. I need, for people who have models established, the main point of this entire thing is that I want to gain data. So I would need, all I want to know is what your model is and how you achieved it and how you built it. Sorry. That's all I want to know. You can bring PDFs, examples, but I'm not necessarily trying to rip off models. I'm trying to, what's the word? I'm trying to understand the process and put it on paper. That's what I'm trying to do. I want to be able to systemize how you get from foundation to model, because I already have this in place. Look, I'm sorry, wrong one. I already have this, which is a great overview. Where is it? Right here. Our best post to date, pretty much. What? Oh, wrong one, wrong post. Sorry. Right here. This. I already have a general overview of how that happened, but I need to know how to actually get it from step 1 to step whatever, final step. But that's going to be pretty much the two things I'm going to work on with the group. Yeah. This is, I want to make like a little kind of, I'd like to make like a YouTube series for it. I think that would be super cool. I think it's super unique, and I wouldn't be giving out anything that I haven't already brought up in public, you know? I think it's super, super interesting, because this is definitely something nobody ever shows. Trust me, nobody ever shows. And if I'm noticing the term model be used a lot more now, a lot more recently, where people are showing schematics of their own models or whatever, but that kind of defeats the purpose. Like I've said before, like if you're trying to teach your model, is way different from trying to teach you how to create a model. They're two different things. Because one is copy paste, one is understand apply. And that's why I think that's another conversation. But if I can make a YouTube series out of that, that would be pretty cool, I think. Because in case you guys don't know, we have over 5K subs on here, and I have not even you know, posted anything. I've legitimately not posted anything outside of the Zooms and the old course. So I think that's pretty cool. Like without putting any true effort into this, this has over 5K subs. And who knows where we could take this, you know? I think this is going to be the difference maker here for sure. Because the difference maker within RCV I've seen is people who can actually apply their own model. So all I want to know, like I said, is what your model is and how you got it, and how you got it, how you built it. That's all I want to know. These two things right here. Because for the most part, I think these are probably the two things that I'm missing, but I think the course is pretty complete. You just have to read between the lines a lot. Yeah, there's no rush with this. You can take the whole next week, because I'm going to try to collect data over the next like 2 weeks for number one, before I even start to make them. And then I can't even do number two until number one is done, so. Yep, you just have to read between the lines. Giving you guys the opportunity to think is, I think, a big difference maker. And I mean, that's literally what this is. This is literally what this is, thinking. You're thinking about how to transition a foundation into a strategy. Foundation to strategy to trading plan to trading model. 4 steps, and how you can transition from one to the next, to the next, to the next. That's all I pretty much want to gather data on. But yeah, that'll be it for today, guys. Yeah, man, you guys have a great rest of your weekend. UFC 267 is stacked. It is stacked. You best believe I'm gonna be watching that. One of the best cards, I think, of the year, in my opinion. But yeah, hope you guys have a great weekend.